Welcome to Hunters and Unicorns, the Sales Leaders Playbook. Today we welcome Carlos Delatorre, CRO, TripAction, a business with a moderate 625 million investment from the likes of Lightspeed Venture Partners and A16Z. In this episode, we discover a remarkable turnaround of a technology business operating in one of the most challenging sectors in the world, travel. This is his playbook.
Edition series, the 33 CxOs, we investigate one of the greatest success stories in the history of software sales. 33 CxOs learnt the playbook from one man, John McMahon, a legacy which stretches back to the late 90s at a company called PTC. They were later reunited at BladeLogic, which was acquired by BMC. What happened next was truly remarkable. These CxOs went on to become the most prolific sales leaders in the software industry. They've raised over 22 billion in VC funding. They contribute to 4% of software turnover globally, 26 unicorns, 8 decacorns, and the companies they drive have a combined valuation of 230 billion. At Hunters and Unicorn, we're revealing their playbook.
Welcome to Hunters and Unicorns. I'm Simon Kutis and I'm joined by my co-host Ollie Kune.
Hey everyone.
And it's an absolute privilege and honor to welcome Carlos Delatorre. Carlos, welcome.
Welcome. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to meet with the two of you today.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much for joining us. Really much appreciated, Carlos. We know how busy you are. So yeah, really looking forward to this one.
So Carlos, currently TripActions, obviously 600 million funding, backed by Lightspeed Venture Partners and A16Z. Just tell us a little bit about TripActions and what you guys are doing and what your role is there.
So TripActions is the fastest growing travel management company in history. Pre-COVID, the company was growing at north of 10% month over month. Essentially went from 2 million to 120 million recurring revenue in about 2 years with a very efficient economics. Obviously, COVID's had a massive impact on the travel industry and TripActions, as a company in particular. However, we had a really rough March and April, and what's happened since then is a few things. I think we as an organization have learned how to talk about what we do and the value of our solution and improving a company's travel post-COVID. We've learned how to do that better. Also, the company has innovated at a breakneck speed. We're really the only technology company in the travel space. And so while the rest of the industry has in disarray and some of our competitors have laid off 70, 80% of their people and stopped funding their toll-free numbers and increased their fees, in that context, we've been innovating at a breakneck speed. We've released a COVID dashboard so that companies can manage travel in a way that takes into consideration the relative risks associated with the departure and the destination region or location, better controls for costs, et cetera. And so I think what companies realize is that travel was a big deal before COVID because it was such a big line item. It was typically the second biggest line item in a company's expense statement. Post-COVID, the stakes are even higher because not only is it a big expense, but they have to consider the livelihood or the safety of their employees. And they realize that business recovery is intertwined with travel. You want your salespeople out there closing business. If you're a construction company, you need your workers out there on site if you're building something. And so with the hopefully opening up of travel in the not too distant future, companies realize and are open to the idea of taking advantage of this downtime to optimize their travel program, how they manage payments, how they manage expense reporting. And TripActions really has risen to the occasion from a product perspective. We've actually had 5 of the 8 biggest months in the company's history during COVID. We went into COVID with 3 Fortune 500 customers. We now have 8, and I'm confident we'll have over a dozen by the end of the year. And so March and April were rough, but we're actually thriving from the perspective of signing on new customers and innovating from a product perspective.
Right. Well, obviously, it's a remarkable company. As you said, it is a technology company, which is fantastic. We are going to talk a little bit more about the mission and what it is you're doing, kind of a bit later on in the show. But actually, Carlos, I want to take you down memory lane. Let's go right to the beginning where it all started. So, tell us, how did you get into software sales?
Into software sales? Well, after college, my first sort of corporate job, if you will, was selling medical equipment. And I was working for a company called Coulter. And my territory initially was in the Southeast. I lived in Birmingham, Alabama. And I did well there. And the company moved me out to the Bay Area because their top competitor was based there and they were having a hard time in the Bay Area. And so I was in my early 20s at the time. I landed in the Bay Area and started meeting people in tech and recognized that there were a lot of smart people who were more economically successful than I was. And I thought I was at sort of the top of the game. I thought medical was the pinnacle of what one could do in sales. And moving to San Francisco really opened my eyes to technology. And then I was very, very fortunate that, coincident with me being intrigued by technology, but not really knowing anything about it, coincident with that, a recruiter, I can't remember the guy's name, he recruited quite a bit for parametric technology. Guy was out of Sacramento. He called me up and encouraged me to take an interview with PTC, which I did. And they were the smartest, most aggressive, most switched on people I had met in my professional life at the time. I remember my first interview was dual. I interviewed with Todd Klubnik and Kathleen Brennan, and I came away from that interview on cloud 9. Anyway, long story short, I was very fortunate to get hired on at PTC, and I joined in September of '95. So that's how I got into software.
I mean, it's a remarkable place. Obviously, PTC. The story we're obviously covering is a moment in time. We are obviously talking about BladeLogic, but actually the genesis was PTC, and we have spoken a lot about PTC. Just tell us, was it the perfect match for you? Why do you think they hired you? I later learned they had a pretty clear sort of recruiting philosophy. They went to industries where they believed that there was a lot of sales talent, where there was a lot of sales enablement, and where there were companies that were intolerant of non-performance. And so they went into those industries and picked out the best people because they knew that by pulling them into software, they could show them more financial upside. And so they hired the best people out of medical. They hired the best people out of copier sales, out of payroll services, and a few other industries. These were industries where the top reps might make back then $100,000, $120,000, $150,000. And they could show salespeople that could make significantly more than that, and
And so they were able to pick sort of the best of. But when you hire people from a different industry, you're really hiring the talent. And so the only way for that strategy to work is to also to pair it with fantastic enablement, which PTC did. They had really, really strong sales training.
Brilliant. And you were there for 4 years. Did you join as an individual contributor, Carlos?
I did. Yes, I joined in the Mountain View office. There were people had offices back then. It was before the days of open plan, and there weren't any offices left. And so they cleared out a utility closet, a small utility closet for me, and it smelled like bleach. And I'm very proud of the fact that I got my start at PTC in a room that smelled like cleaning supplies.
Brilliant. Who was it that was your mentor at that stage? So who did you report into?
Well, I reported to Todd Klubnik, and he was great. He was a great developer and very supportive. But really, my mentor initially, the guy I looked up to, was Jim Drill. He was my second line manager, and he was awesome. He I remember it was one of my first. Might have been my first meeting where he was presenting, and he was talking about the importance of building pipeline, and he told a great story about a guy running a marathon, and the guy's running the race, and he's got a rock in his shoe, and he's running the race, and he's a couple of miles into it, and this rock's kind of bothering him, but he doesn't really want to slow down and take out the rock or anything. He's got a race to run. And so he keeps running. And a few miles later, the annoyance has become painful. But he keeps running. At this point, he couldn't possibly stop. He's doing well in this race. And by the end of the race, by the latter stages of the race, he can see his tennis shoe has become sort of dark red, brown because of the blood, because the rock has bored a hole in the bottom of his foot. And now he's really limping, and runners are starting to pass him by, and he ultimately doesn't do very well in the race. And it's because he didn't stop and take the rock out of his shoe. And that's what pipeline generation is. Like, if you have a pipeline problem, it's very tempting to say, oh, I'm going to take the few deals that I do have, and I'm just going to execute really hard. I'm going to run really hard and turn these shitty deals into a decent forecast. You can't. Just stop. Take the rock out of the shoe, recognize you don't have a pipeline, and PG, and go dedicate yourself to PG. And he was dead right, and it was a very valuable lesson. And I still remember the story. Jim's great. Jim can tell a story better than just about anybody.
What a great story! Fantastic. So obviously PTC. After PTC, you kind of you grew within the business. You became kind of more kind of management positions within PTC, or? Yep.
Yeah, exactly a year after I joined, things happened in quarters there. So I joined 2 weeks before the end of the fiscal year, and it was exactly a year and 2 weeks later that I moved to Dallas, Texas, to be the DM for northern Texas. After that, I went to Spain. And I was a regional director in Spain and Portugal. And then my last stint with them was actually back in the Bay Area as AVP of the Northwest. So few roles.
Fantastic. And what was it that you think they saw in you at that point, Carlos, that they wanted to give you the responsibility of management?
I think they recognized that I was more of a scientist than an artist. You have great salespeople that I know you had John on here. I'm not sure. I haven't seen his show, so I don't know if he talked about artists, but I certainly learned it from John that there are some people who are great and they don't know why. They just are. It's instinct. And there are some people who are more process oriented, and I definitely fall into the latter category. And so if you're process oriented, then you tend to think in processes and KPIs, in metrics. You think about building tools and building enablement. And so I think they thought that that I was able to replicate my performance across a team. It's probably, I'm guessing that's what they saw.
Sure. Interesting. So obviously PTC, 5 years, great stint there. Then on to Embion, was it, for 8 months?
And beyond, yeah. So this is the .com days.
Right.
I'm at PTC, and let me see if I can center the camera here. Oh, went the wrong way. No, wrong way. Is that all right?
A little bit more.
A little bit more. Is that good?
A little bit more.
One more. How's that? No, one more.
One more. There you go.
Good?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Right. So I'm at PTC, and I used to meet up with my friend Ara sometimes on Fridays. We went to the Palomino, famous bar in San Francisco. It's gone now. And I meet Ara for a beer on a Friday, and this is like the internet is just happening. And PTC was a great company, but it wasn't an internet company. So it was definitely in the back of my mind that potentially I was missing out on this internet explosion that was happening. And Ara is someone I knew from the medical days, and we started talking about how the internet might shape the medical equipment marketplace. And we came up with an idea on a napkin, and Ara said, "Hey, I think I'm gonna see if I can get us a meeting with some VCs to talk about this." And I thought that was nonsense, but it was fun to talk about over a beer. And sure enough, the next week, Ara had a meeting with Acacia Venture Partners, and one thing led to another. A month later, we were in another closet, ironically, Ara and I and another guy, Todd, and the three of us spent the next few months writing a business plan that ultimately became a company called Provider Links, which a few months later merged with a company called Embion. And that's what that was. It was a marketplace for medical products. We were one of about a dozen companies, trying to solve that problem. And we got some traction, but the bubble burst. The bubble burst before we had secured enough funding to really make the company successful. So ultimately, it was acquired by another company that has since been acquired. And the thing we built is still out there, but the company was ultimately not successful. It was a great experience, though.
Sure. And this is where the streak happens, right? You obviously joined Oblix in 2000, which was then acquired by Oracle. IMLogic, which was then acquired by Symantec, then on to BladeLogic, 2006. Tell us about this day, who called you, and how that all came about.
John and I were, John was giving me some career advice, and that career advice, led to him proposing that I took a look at BladeLogic, which at the time was pretty small and unproven, and I had a handful of conversations with John. I remember my official interview with John when I went out to the office in Lexington there. And I spent, I want to say 2.5 or 3 hours with John, and then he had me meet some other folks. But he went deep. He got to know me well, I think.
Sure. So obviously, you knew John at that point. You knew that he's obviously made some great decisions prior to that. So what other points to that? Because you've mentioned that you're quite a technical person. You also mentioned that you're quite analytical. At that point, what is the decision criteria you're thinking about taking on a new role and a new opportunity?
Yeah, to be frank, I was conflicted about joining BladeLogic because my alternatives were bigger roles, bigger teams. I had 2 alternatives, and they were both bigger teams. I think they were bigger comp, and John did a good job of helping me appreciate the value of being developed by him. He sold himself. I knew of John, but at PTC, there were multiple levels in between. So I had really only ever gone on one or two, maybe two sales calls with John. But certainly his reputation was very strong. But during that recruitment process, he helped me see the value of having a great boss. And ultimately, that's what I bet on. And he was right. And it was a fantastic experience. And lots of great things happened as a result. So I'm very thankful to him for convincing me to take that role, which wasn't obvious from on paper. It wasn't obvious at the time.
So obviously, having previously worked at PTC, you did a couple of stints, and then working with John kind of a lot closer. What did you start to change, or what did you realize you had to start to change, in that environment?
Oh gosh, there's so much. One thing that became obvious working with John is that it's not about managing appearances. And, I think a lot of companies, a lot of sales teams, QBRs and sales reporting is all about creating an aura that everything is okay and everything's going to be good in the future. And you sort of learn how to build these facades to mask the issues. And actually, you can actually talk yourself into thinking that everything is fine and ignoring the issues. And that doesn't fly with John. John is a no bullshit guy, and he zeroes in on the problems, and he does so. He's very perceptive, and so he can pick up on quick comments or indicators of an issue. And he's like a dog on a bone. He'll go until he gets to the real issue, and he will bring that issue to light and make the conversation about what's really wrong. And that's a very healthy thing, but that was new for me in the career. And so having conversations about what's really going on is one of the many aspects that was new. Having QBRs that weren't sort of an orchestrated show, but rather a real conversation about what's happening in the business, and specifically what's not right, what the problems are. There are people problems, there are enablement problems, there are pipeline problems, and having real conversations about those things. That was eye-opening for me working for John and in that period.
And how did that help you?
Well, there's no other way to fix a problem than to focus on it. And so if you're talking about what's really broken, and if you believe in yourself and you're committed to being the best that you can be, then that conversation about what's broken leaves you post QBR with some things to really work on. And then come back at the next QBR and hopefully either show some progress or talk about the stumbles that you had trying to fix those problems.
I suppose obviously Medic is a component of that, right? I think obviously that sits right on top of what you're talking about. Was adopting this kind of mindset, did this really help you understand the nuances behind what was actually going on? Did this mindset that you're talking about now, was that kind of when the lights came on for you?
If you think about an onion, Medic, I use MedPick. I like to incorporate a P for paper process, but Medic or MedPick is I think it's fairly straightforward. It's a framework for evaluating an opportunity, identifying the gaps, the risks, building a strategy, and then tying action items to that strategy. So it's a very useful framework, but I think what I learned at BladeLogic and what I learned from John goes much deeper than analyzing a given deal. It's analyzing an individual. and analyzing an individual's innate capabilities and analyzing their skills and making real decisions about, are they in the right role? Are they in the right company? And if those two things are true, then what is the priority of skill gaps they have? And therefore, we can build a program to make this person successful. People they can't learn multiple things at once. And so what's the most important thing for them to learn now? And then the next thing, and then the next thing. So that's at the individual level. And then I think you can look at it at a team level. You can look at it at an organization level. You can look at it, at the entire company level. So just this mindset of looking for the problems and then going through a thoughtful, logical, programmatic process of putting a plan in place to fix the problems, whether we're talking about the problems with a deal, an individual, a team, or an entire organization.
Interesting. And for you, I suppose, coming from with that mathematical mindset and kind of wanting to break it down into components, that must have been quite comforting for you and in the way that it works and the way that you work, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it works for me.
Sure. So look, obviously, BladeLogic was started area vice president for East 2006. We had the acquisition happen in 2008. You've been at all these really exciting startups in an agile environment, and then along comes BMC. How did you feel when you heard that announcement?
When I heard the announcement, I was on my way downtown in Manhattan to a meeting with Bank of New York, and I was in a taxi when I heard the announcement. I think I got a text message from Scott Davis, I believe. I was devastated. I was really sad, and I was very distracted during this meeting at Bank of New York, and then I came out of the meeting, and by that time, a couple hours had passed, and there was plenty of news about it. I thought, BladeLogic was such a beautiful thing. We had IPO'd 6 months before, and we were filled with enthusiasm and hope and really vigor to sort of take on the world as a standalone publicly traded company. And so the idea of getting swallowed up by a legacy company that was comparatively very slow moving was devastating. What ended up happening, though, over the ensuing weeks and months, is that I realized there was an opportunity for the BladeLogic team to have a real positive impact on BMC that was only going to be possible if we had the right leadership in place. And so John spent some time. John was offered the role to be the leader of BMC, and he wasn't sure he wanted to take it. And so he spent a little time deliberating over whether to take that role or not. And BMC had been fairly generous with the BladeLogic leaders in terms of stock grants. And so, I knew and people around me knew that there was money to be made if we stayed at BMC and really invested ourselves in making BMC better. But I'll just speak for myself. There was no chance I was going to do it unless John was the leader, because I didn't believe in the way the organization was operating. And so I hadn't really made money yet in my career. So I wanted to make the money, but I wasn't willing to stick around under inferior leadership. And so I was rooting for John to take the role and doing what I could to encourage him to do so. And the morning that he let me know he had decided to take the role, there was a real spring in my step, and I did something that's not like me. I made an impulse purchase. I went to a jewelry store in Midtown Manhattan, and I bought myself a Panerai. I decided to wear it today because I knew I was going to be talking to you about this. I know Jeremy Duggan had one of these things, and I thought it was pretty cool. And but I also knew they were like $7,000. But once John decided to take the role, I knew I was going to make money, and I went in and paid list whatever they asked. I didn't even negotiate. I just walked out with it. So thank you, John, for taking that role. I'm wearing a watch today.
Brilliant story, that one.
So I was going to say, so what was the mission? So once John had taken over, I know he kind of rounded up his generals, put them in key positions. What was your role?
I ran the East. So it was the same sort of geography, but it was a much bigger team. So I ran the East. There was a really awkward few months there when the BladeLogic team were still specialists and sort of I'd say subservient to a degree to the BMC core team, and so there was a period there with a lot of friction, and it wasn't much fun. And then the organization got, I think, collapsed together, and it was one organization. And then I think that was the beginning of a period where the sales execution was elevated, expectations and accountability were elevated, and there was a lot of change in the organization. There were people that just didn't fit with the new operating cadence, so we had to make a lot of people changes during that period.
So were you running boot camps, or what did you do to get these guys up to your rhythm?
We did run training. We didn't call them boot camps. I don't remember what we called them, but yeah, we ran training. I don't remember what the cadence was. Whether it was, I think we ran a weekly sort of PG oriented training, but then we ran monthly trainings. We did, yeah, I don't remember exactly the cadence, but we definitely elevated the training quite a bit. We, instituted dedicated pipeline generation sessions. We came up with the idea of doing a business value assessment where you partner with a customer to assess the potential value of the solution and essentially build a business case that can then justify a decision. So we elevated the way the team was operating in a lot of ways. Not the least of which is introducing, MEDIC or MEDPIC into the forecasting process.
And in terms of your evolution as a sales leader, did you find that you were finding your own rhythm? Were you kind of crafting your own style by this time, or? Yeah,
yeah, I think so. I think it was the first time that I was running a large team. And John was running a very large team. And so I think it was the first time that I felt a real sense of autonomy. And, we didn't have enough time to run every decision by the boss. And so I had to make sort of people decisions and deal related decisions on my own at scale. So that I'd say towards the end of my BladeLogic experience, and certainly into the BMC times, was the first time that I really felt like I was operating autonomously.
Sure. So at this stage, you've obviously got a taste for autonomy. Do you think at this point is the point where you realize, do you know what, where am I going? And do I want a seat at the top table? Do you think it was at that point that started to...
Yeah, it was around that time. It was around my time at BMC that I guess as a result of operating autonomously, I figured out that I could do it, or I thought I could do it, and so that's when I became sort of ambitious to be a head of sales.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the pattern continues from here, right? You move on to Dynamic Ops, which you're there 2011, 2013, which is then acquired by VMware, another huge company. And then Clearside, Senior Vice President, there for a year. And then by the sounds of things, Devici area probably got a call from Dave. 2014 to take on your first CRO role, right?
Well, actually, Dynamic Ops was a head of sales. The title CRO wasn't popular then, but it was at BMC that I felt confident that I could, run or build a sales organization, and Dynamic Ops was my first opportunity to do so. It was a small one, but that was my first time. And then Dynamic Ops got acquired, in my opinion, prematurely. There was a lot of potential still there, but we got acquired by VMware, and I didn't want to stay at VMware, and so I took a job at ClearSlide, and the business was growing quickly, but to be honest, the cultural fit for me wasn't great at ClearSlide. But I'd moved out to the Bay Area for the ClearSlide gig, and so when Dave Itachiria accepted the job at MongoDB to be the CEO, he called me, not proposing that I join, but looking for networking because he knew I was in the Bay Area. And he actually had something to do with me landing at ClearSlide. So he called me just looking for suggestions of good people in the East, in the New York area. And given that I wasn't really, while the business was doing well, I wasn't enjoying, frankly, my time at ClearSlide. And so I threw my hat in the ring and asked him to consider me, which he did. And thankfully that culminated in me joining a few months later.
And what a rocket ship MongoDB's been, right? Look, just before we start talking about MongoDB, it's kind of, I'm really interested in kind of your mindset, right? You've been nearly 15 years at this stage, having left PTC, and kind of we take it from Oblix, building acquired, building acquired, building acquired, building acquired, what is the mindset of, and how do you keep doing that, right? Because it's not a Monday to Friday, 9 till 5, right? It's not something that, is done lightheartedly.
Yeah.
What is it that's driving you at this stage to keep doing that?
I'd say the motivation for me has definitely evolved over time. I'd say early in my career, it was a fear of being poor and a guilt for the sacrifices that my family made. And then I think maybe towards the middle stages, it was more an ambition to see what I could achieve. I'd say now or lately, it really is. I get a ton of satisfaction out of seeing others realize their potential. When I look back on my time at MongoDB, the thing that I'm most proud of and that's most rewarding is not the IPO or the money or the recognition or anything like that, but rather the impact that company and that experience has had on individuals, people who came in with a lot of potential, but maybe not a great track record or not a lot of skill. And they applied themselves, they realized their potential, they got promoted, maybe promoted multiple times, and either went off to do other things or are still there and thriving. But the experience at MongoDB changed their careers, changed their lives. They bought vacation homes or put their kids through college or bought their first car or what have you. That's extremely rewarding. And so that trumps everything else for me right now.
Incredible. Yeah, I'm sure. So obviously MongoDB, you're there for 4 years, standing CRO, a company which has just gone, from where it was to where it is today, one of the fastest growing software companies in its time at the moment. But, from there, you went on for that role, moved on to Vera as a CEO, right? So you've now broken that glass ceiling. You've gone to CRO, and now you've taken on a CEO role. Tell us about that. What made you make that change?
Yeah. So I spent about 4 years at MongoDB, and MongoDB is based in New York, and I was living in San Francisco through that period. So I was traveling essentially every week, and after about 4 years of that, and my wife pregnant with our second child, it felt like we either needed to move back to New York, or I needed to go explore other opportunities. And I made the decision. I thought I was ready. I felt ready to be a CEO, and I went to a company, Vera, and I genuinely believed that the company and the people who hired me believed that the company was poised to scale and really ready to focus on building a go-to-market engine. What became apparent as I got there and spent some time there is there was a lot of promise, a lot of potential, but still some work to do on the product before it really made sense to make big investments in the go-to-market. And so after about a year there, it made sense for me to look at other things. And so I had to make a tough decision. Do I look at other CEO gigs or not? And the calculus that I made was, at that point, I was still an unproven CEO. And so I would have to take another sort of small or troubled company to prove myself. And only then would I essentially qualify for an A+ CEO gig. And being in my early 50s, I made the decision that I wanted to do one more, one more run, if you will, and I wanted to put myself in a position where I could have that impact on people's lives in as big a scale as possible. And so I wanted to look for a company that was operating in a very large market with a significant product advantage and a top-notch executive team, and a company that I thought could scale in a big way, so that I could have a hand at what happened at MongoDB potentially on an even bigger scale. And so that was really my criteria. I decided I could get an A+ CRO gig, a company that ticked all the boxes. And so I looked around for that and settled on TripActions, and absolutely believe that that's exactly what this is. I think this company is poised to dominate the global corporate travel and expense management space. Corporate travel is pre-COVID, it's 6 times as large as all enterprise software combined. It's a $1.5 trillion marketplace. So even if the market contracts by, say, 30% post-COVID, well, then it's only 4 times bigger than enterprise software combined. And we do have a solution that pre-COVID was 10 times better than the alternatives. Post-COVID, we've launched an expense management solution that essentially does away with the idea of filing or reviewing or reconciling expense reports. And so an end-to-end global solution for travel, payments, and expense management. What we're building here now is I think you'd have to go back to Salesforce.com or AWS to find a company that's poised to have the same kind of outcome. If you'll allow me, I'd like to make an analogy. I was in New York during 9/11. I'm happy that I was able to escape the building, actually, narrowly that day. But I was selling into IT in the period post 9/11, and I saw something interesting occur, which is that IT organizations suddenly had to contemplate the possibility of having their data center, on fire and inoperable. And so they had to have a disaster recovery strategy. And there was a little e-commerce company that was 6 months away from going bankrupt that had unutilized compute capacity. And they developed this business called AWS to resell that data center capability in the wake of 9/11. And so they really optimized their offering and their messaging and their go-to-market to solve that problem. And here we are 20 years later, and Amazon's I think the biggest company on the planet, and 70% of their margins, their profit, comes from AWS. And it was from a very challenged period, in the industry and for Amazon. This is absolutely TripAction's Amazon moment, and we're doing all the right things from a product perspective, from an organizational perspective, and so I'm very confident that there's going to be a really exciting story to be told here in the years to come.
So that's great. Thanks for that insight. So in terms of your kind of playbook, Carlos, so you walk in day one, you walk through the doors at TripActions. What are your first moves?
Assess the people, assess the leaders, and make whatever additions or changes to the team are necessary, and then to look at how the team is operating and begin on a journey of elevating sales execution and helping the organization grow into its potential and being a best-in-class sales organization. So some of the early things that we thought about and did was the notion of thinking about champions and assessing the politics in accounts and identifying economic buyers and getting to those people, implementing MedPick at scale as a method for qualifying deals. We've transitioned to a process where we dedicate Tuesdays to pipeline generation. We do quarterly business reviews. We do QBRs once a quarter. So definitely bringing the organization to a little bit more rigor and structure and a more repeatable operating cadence on a weekly, monthly, and quarterly basis.
Incredible. Carlos, we always like to end the podcast with a couple of questions, one of which is to understand what you do outside of work, right? As I mentioned earlier, there is a huge amount of your time, no doubt, consumed with all these different projects, but how do you find time for yourself, and what do you do in your spare time?
Well, I have two little kids. I have a 5-year-old boy, Lucas, and a 2-year-old daughter, Olympia. So I definitely spend time with them and our dog. We hiking and whatnot. When it's me time, I like to ride a bike. I like to ride a road bike, a little bit of mountain biking, but more road. I love music. I was a DJ early in life, and so I still. Is that like how you met?
Is that, well? Obviously, you and Mark Musselman came part of each other at BladeLogic, but obviously we've had him on the show, and his obviously success in DJing. Do you ever spin some records with him?
I never. Yeah, maybe, you know what? Maybe I did at a house party in Montauk once, but yeah, we've definitely connected on that front. I just saw him a few weeks ago for his 50th birthday party, but yeah, so I definitely like to geek out with audio equipment and listen to music loudly. I like to drive faster than I should as well.
Love that. And by the sound of things, your day-to-day job is all speed as well. So
yeah, indeed.
So Simon.
Yeah. So I suppose the final question, Carlos, we always ask is, does the hunter make the unicorn, in the sense of the hunter being kind of the sales hunter, is it possible to create the billion-dollar valuation companies? Would they be as successful without the hunters?
Well, I think you asked two questions there, and my answers are different. Can you build a billion-dollar company without a great sales organization? I think the answer is yes. There are some out there. If the product is just so extraordinary and solves such a big need, the market will figure it out, and you can build a great company with maybe just an okay sales organization. I think there are examples of that. Now, can you optimize the potential for a solution and for a company without a great sales organization? Absolutely not. You do need, I think you need all three ingredients. You need a market that's big and that has some real pain. You need a solution that's highly differentiated and differentiated in a way that provides customers with real value and competitive advantage. And then if you pair that with a sales organization that can take more than its fair share, that can sort of shake customers into recognizing that they need to think about this area and make a decision, then that's when you get the optimal or the magical outcomes. And you've seen MongoDB, Snowflake, and many others where you've got that combination of market, product, and sales.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Great answer. So I suppose in terms of a summary, Carlos, we always try and bring links. The 33 CxO series is very much about understanding the common factors, the common values. Why has this remarkable group gone on to create such incredible success, as a collective, but then as individuals? And so kind of reflecting on your story and your past. So we've obviously heard the journey through kind of PTC and that story that you shared about the rock in the shoe. I think it's a great analogy because at the beginning of your career, it's very, very evident. Obviously, you're kind of concentrating on the mastery of the craft and really understanding that analogy and becoming a master of being able to take that rock out of the shoe and creating that scientific process around that. And then we start to see the transition of yourself as from being more of an individual to really starting to understand the power of taking power and pride from enabling others. And we can see that shift in mindset from self to others has probably enabled you to continue to propel yourself to the next level. Now, we've heard from others about your ability to really maniacally break things down, understand processes, use that science in order for you to really enable others. But I think it's not just the process, but I think it's the passion for you wanting to see success in others, which has enabled you to elevate your success to the level that you have. So, Carlos, I just wanted to say what an absolute pleasure and honor it has been to have you on the show. We are so psyched to be sharing your story with the world. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you very much for the very, very kind and generous words and for the opportunity. It's been a lot of fun. Simon and Oliver, keep doing this. This is great.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much for your time, Carlos. Appreciate you're a ridiculously busy man. So thank you once again.
All the best.